Awesome. We are live. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to be here. I see so many highs in the chat. We had like over 500 signups, so we're so excited to be here with Miggi from Figma. Miggi makes a lot of great tutorials on Figma, and today we're bringing you a highly requested topic, advanced auto layout. I remember when I was starting out in Figma, auto layout confused me a lot, so I'm super excited to bring more advanced topic to y'all as well. I see so much hi in the chat. For our icebreaker question today, we want to know, Miggi and Alex and I want to know, what is your favorite ice cream flavor? And let me get a banner. Share it in the chat. Maybe you want to share where you're all tuning in from. So what is your favorite ice cream flavor? What is your favorite ice cream flavor, Miggi?
Mine, anything with peanut butter in it. I like a good sweet cream ice cream, and then if there's like peanut butter cups or just peanut butter flavored, I'm all about it.
Amazing. I like tropical fruit flavors.
Tropical fruit flavors, nice.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of like sorbets?
Yeah, I like sorbets. I'm like low-key lactose intolerant, so it's fine.
Oh man, I'm sorry I made that ask the question.
Oh
We should have
no,
reframed the
good.
question as like, what is your favorite like summertime cool treat?
That's okay. Wow, we have like 128 people already, and it's only been like 1 minute. So yes, we want to know, what is your favorite ice cream flavor? I see, I'm gonna read out some of them. Darsha from Toronto likes matcha. Tony from Dallas likes chocolate chip. Bill likes butter pecan. Coconut, passion fruit, butter pecan, coconut, Costa Rica, nice. Gilroy garlic, ice cream, interesting. Cookies and cream, hello from Chicago, amazing. For those of us just joining, we have like 150 people live on LinkedIn and a couple people from YouTube. So we want to know where you're tuning in from and what is your favorite ice cream flavor. Let us know in the chat. And maybe if you like the same ice cream flavor as someone, connect with them on LinkedIn and say y'all met at this event, because we love buddies and connecting with others. Amazing. So let's get started. We have a lot of ground to cover today with our guest Miggi here. I'm going to start sharing my screen for briefly a little bit. If y'all are new to Design Buddies, I'll just give a quick intro of who we are and what we do. Let me share my screen. And I actually make these slides on Figma. I am a huge Figma fan. I actually make all my slide decks on Figma, even myself. I'm Grace. I do a lot of talks as well. So Design Buddies is a community to help you level up your design career. Our goal is to provide content, community, events for you to improve your design skills, make friends, and land that job, get the promotion, make that bread, level up in career while having lots of fun. And I'm Grace. I founded Design Buddies when I was a student back in April 2020. I was pivoting my career from engineering to design, and I felt like a small potato in this whole huge, big world of design. And I want some friends, and I like bunnies. So I made this Discord server called Design Buddies, and today we have 63,000 members who joined. We do a lot of events, in-person, online, design challenges, content, and more. We actually launched our podcast, and we have our first in-person conference. It's going to be hybrid, but in-person in San Francisco on Monday, May 20th, 2024, called Design the Future. And we host a lot of events like this, and definitely feel free to connect with us. I'm Grace Ling. I'm also a UX designer at a large tech company, and I'm a content creator, so definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions, concerns, something you want to see with Design Buddies. And yeah, feel free to hop in. And with that, I'll pass it over to Miggi from Figma for Education. Definitely check out Miggi's content as well. They're very exciting. And I actually met Miggi in person, I think at a Figma event in San Francisco. So it was really great connecting with Miggi as well. I'm really excited to have Miggi on. With that, take it away, Miggi.
Awesome. Thank you, Grace. Thanks for that awesome introduction. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Oh, yeah. Also, yeah, it was Config, right? We got to meet a Config, and then there was this awesome Design Buddies meetup.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Is going to be happening in June. If you go to config.figma.com and you're interested in heading out, like, registration's already open. So
I'll be there.
Awesome. Can't wait to see you there. Hi, everybody. My name is Miggi. I'm a designer advocate for education at Figma. I'm also joined by Alex. Alex is kind of here. Oh, Alex just disappeared. She's back. Alex is a design manager and helps to organize these events. So everybody give Alex a shout out in the chat there. There we go. All right, so I'm currently in a Figma file. Today we're going to be talking about advanced auto layout. I'm going to walk through a little bit about what auto layout is, why you use it. Some designers absolutely love it. Some feel intimidated by it. It might be a little bit difficult. Hopefully my goal is to make you all a little bit more comfortable in approaching auto layout and identifying when you can use it to help out your designs. So like I mentioned, my name is Miggi. I'm a designer advocate, and you can access this file that I'm working with. It is currently a community file. So if you are logged into Figma, if you go to figma.fun /APQZQG, it's going to be shared there as well. So figma.fun APQZQG. You will be able to get a copy of this file and follow along with me as I move through here today. All right, so a couple of quick things. Figma and FigJam are free for students and educators. If you go to figma.com, you sign up, then you go to figma.education, you can verify your education status. When you verify your education status, you can create education teams. Education teams are going to unlock a ton of professional features for you. You can work with other students. So if you are a student, you're in a class, you want to work with your teacher, you want to work with other people on a team, you can create that education team and get access to advanced prototyping. You'll have no limits on files. You have no limits on version history, and it will behave just as if you're using the full tier professional product. So sign up for Figma, verify your education status at figma.education, create an education team. So you must create an education team. If you create a starter team, you're still going to hit those file limits. It just gives you the ability to create education teams. Doesn't make all your teams education teams. And then if you head on to figma.com/@education, you'll see that we have a bunch of tutorials and such to get started with. So we run a lot of workshops, and you can check that out. All right. So we're going to get talking about auto layout. And the first thing you'll see here, Shift A, is the auto layout shortcut. We're going to use a shortcut a lot today. But first, I want to talk a little bit about why you would use auto layout in the first place. So when you are designing things, right? So you're designing for screens, or like even if you're designing something like a presentation, you're going to be working with content that's going to stack, or it's going to be reliant upon other things. So the way that the web works, you make these elements and they kind of stack from the top down to the bottom. So when you're designing, oftentimes, like back in the olden days of before Figma, right? If I was making this layout and I made some changes here, let's say I add more text, and I add more text here, you'll notice that as I'm adding text, then I have to make adjustments. I have to open this up. I have to move this down. Oh, this is here. I have to move this out of the way. Before auto layout, this was a big problem. Your text didn't grow and adjust, and you would have to move all of those different elements out of the way just so you can kind of move things down. And this kept you from doing what you wanted to do, which is just design something, right? So with auto layout, you can have many different elements. I'm just going to demonstrate that very quickly here. Imagine if I had those same cards, they're all lined up. So I have 1, 2, 3, right? They're all different sizes. I can create a permanent relationship between those elements. When I press Shift A, they're now going to be stacked. So if this one gets larger, the other ones beneath it move. Let's say I want to take this red one and I want to put this red one above the other ones, right? I want to manually move those around. I can just press the up key and then that goes up and down. So auto layout is going to give you this ability to arrange your elements in a way that they can easily be moved around as you add more content or as you make adjustments to your designs. Okay, so let's talk briefly about what it is to quickly make an auto layout object and how some of this works. This is the most common example. I'm going to show you this common example and I'm going to break it down in the ways possible. Also demonstrating some common oh, I got some folks already in the document here. I'm also going to demonstrate some common shortcuts that you're going to use to move with that auto layout. So you can see here, convert create auto layout is going to be Shift A. To remove auto layout is going to be Option Shift A. If you're on Windows, that's going to be the Alt key. And then to remove a frame is going to be Command Shift G. And we're going to talk about how that works. So this right here is a text node. So this is a text node that I have. Let's put it just right onto the canvas so you can see it over here on the left. So this is just a piece of text. Once I press Shift A, then it has then been converted into an auto layout frame. So here I'm going to take a screenshot so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to make that screenshot a little bit bigger on my screen share. So you see that this text node is now inside of a frame. So if we take a look at that nested behavior, this text, let's see, display that here, is inside that frame. Right. And what this frame is doing, this is the auto layout frame. So let's name that, right? Let's just call this our button. So then this way it's not frame 2000 million, whatever. So let's create that here. I'm going to take a quick screenshot so you can see it. There we go. So we have our button. This icon here denotes that it is an auto layout object, right? So I click here, there's our text node. And now what I can do with this is I can change a number of things about it. So this is in a frame, and this frame is going to respond to the text inside. So once I come over here, I can add a fill, and let's make that fill just a little bit more apparent. I'm going to make that blue, and let's make this text white here. So this is selected. I think somebody is selecting my frame, so I'm going to move that here. Let's change some of my permissions. I think people are hopping into my file. So I'm going to kick them from my file because they don't need to be in here. All right. So here is our button. And you will see that I can add padding around that button. Right. And so even when I hop in here, you can see that there's padding around it. I can change that fill. Right? I could change that color. And so this is going to allow me, I could see everyone's trying to, someone got access to my, my link. And so now everyone's trying to request access to my file. So what I would just ask for y'all is to please go to that figma.fun link. I think, is this the correct thing? Let me just double check. I don't want to get too derailed here. I just want to see where this is going. All right, yeah, please go to the community file. Please do not come to my file outright because otherwise I'm just getting a bunch of notifications of y'all trying to access my file. Okay, so once again, we are here. This is my button. The text node is inside. And one thing that you want to pay attention to is over here, there are now two behaviors. This is what's known as resizing. So right now, the frame around this is hugging that text node. So as I type, that's going to grow. If I hit the return key, it's going to grow with that as well. So you see that the button is going to grow both vertically and horizontally because it's hugging its contents. So as the text field grows, you'll see that button will grow. So let's walk through some easy ways to make this. I can press the T key in Figma and I'm going to create another button. So this is just a text node. I can actually draw out a rectangle and I can place it behind the button. So I can have a rectangle and I can have that text node. I can select them both. So Figma does its best to try to figure out what it is you're trying to do. And I can press Shift A and that's automatically going to make it into an auto layout button. And you can see that here. Over here in my layers panel, we have our frame and I can call this button. There's the text that is inside of it. And when this frame has been created, over here on the right, you'll notice that that panel shows all of the properties associated with this. So we have here the different modes and operations, the padding, the spacing of that button. And I'm going to walk through how best to work with this. All right, cool. So auto layout is not just creating a frame around one object. You can nest multiple objects. So the same way that I showed earlier, where you're probably designing something like, let's say a social media post, right? So I'm designing a social media post card. This is then going to be constructed of a lot of different auto layout features, right? So we have objects that are like stacked horizontally, they're stacked vertically. And so you're going to be nesting auto layout objects. So in the same way that this is composed of auto layout, I can actually create many of these, select them, and then nest those inside of an auto layout frame. So I can have these three. I can choose for them to be vertical. I could choose for them to be horizontal, and I could even change the spacing in between them to stack. So to go back to the basics of that concept, what I can do is I can use these buttons. Each of these buttons happens to be an auto layout frame. So I can type and they will grow. So button, 2, right? We have button 3 and we have button 1. So once again, each of these 3 elements, they're currently inside of this frame. Let's say I want to create that auto layout relationship for them. So as long as they're even slightly arranged in the space that I want them to be, what I can do is I can select them all and I can press that shortcut. If you forget the shortcut, you can select them. You can come over here to the right and you can add auto layout. So here, 1, 2, 3, right? I've selected these 3 objects. You'll notice that they themselves have auto layout properties, but if I press that plus button, they are now all in the same frame. So with them being in the same frame, I can double click inside and I can easily move them around using the arrow keys on my keyboard. I'll show you that one more time. So here I have 3 buttons, item 1, 2, 3. I can select all 3 of them. I can press Shift A. That is then going to place them inside of a frame. So here's our frame. They're not named well, so let's just rename them. I'm going to call this navigation. I'm going to select these 3 and I'm going to hit Command R. And when I press Command R, I can rename all 3 items. So I could just say, item and drop in the number. And there we go. We have those numbers. I don't know if they match up, but that's okay. So here, each one of these are inside of this. I can change the spacing between them. I can even go negative spacing and I can rearrange them. So let's say item number 2, I want to move this up, as well as because this outlying frame is hugging its contents, I could press return and type in more content, and you'll see that as that content is entered, that frame will grow. So once again, just these are the basics. A few other things to highlight here. So Sam just mentioned that like whenever I make a frame, you see that they start at 2.6 million. It could happen either the file is very lived in, or if you copy a frame, I could just make a new frame that is like 4 million. This is a fun little information bit right here. I can make a very large frame. So then that way the next frame I create is also just going to be ridiculously large. So it just kind of happens that way. All right. Cool. So spacing and padding. When I am working with auto layout, and what I would recommend that all of you do, even if you're advanced or even if you're just beginning, do a quick mock-up or wireframe of what it is that you want to create. So let's say if I'm going to make like a UI card, right? And I want to get a sense of how I might construct that in auto layout. What I'm going to do here is expand that. Here we go. Expand that. Here we go. And I'm going to think of these as a row, right? So I'm going to select all 3 of those items. I'm going to press Shift A. So they're inside of that row. So here we go. This is our row, but then we might want it associated with this other card. So I can select all of that and I can press Shift A. And then we have that kind of nested inside. So I have this item and I have this nested row. Now, when you'll notice is I can begin to add some padding around this. And once I add that padding, you'll see on screen controls to adjust that padding and adjust those values. Let's put this on a white background just so you can see this a little bit better on screen. So here we go. When I'm hovering over this, you'll see that that padding shows up and I can adjust that manually here on the canvas. So I have a visual of how I'm controlling. So spacing is going to be between elements. The padding is going to be on the outside of the elements. And there's going to be interesting ways that you can control these in tandem. So if I hold down the Option key, you'll see that that padding is growing on both sides. If I hold down the Option key and the Shift key, you'll see that that padding is going to grow on all sides. All right. So once again, taking a look at an object, let's say you have 4 cards aligned horizontally here, right? I can adjust the spacing in between them manually right here. And what that's doing is adjusting the horizontal gap property here on the right. Cool. So thinking about padding as well, as I adjust this, you'll see that the padding is kind of moving in either direction. Now, one thing that I'm going to identify here, we're going to talk about this concept a little bit later, but constraints is something that is often forgotten about in Figma. What constraints means is you apply these properties to an object to discuss how it's going to resize or how it's going to shape. So right now, when I select this object over here on the right, you can see that my constraints are currently set to center and center. And what that means is that as I shape and grow this, it's growing from the center. So this object is currently inside of this frame here. And if I want it to grow in a different manner, let's say if I wanted to grow from the left and the top, that's the most common, you'll see that these properties are going to grow from the left and the top. Another thing here is if I say right and bottom, these are the constraints. Once again, the constraints are going to basically inform an object how it's going to resize and move when placed inside of another frame. So here you'll see that now when I'm changing this padding, you'll see that it's growing from the left and from the top, or left and the right and the bottom. So constraints is going to be a concept that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. You can visually see constraints on the canvas. Now that it's set to the right and the bottom, you see a little blue line coming from the right, a little blue line coming from the bottom. And that's basically telling me how this object is going to grow as long as it's in this other parent frame. So this is something that people oftentimes forget about. This is why I'm going to call it an advanced concept. It's pretty basic, but it's one of those things that people, they don't really think about too often. So here, if I set this back to center and center, you'll see that those blue lines, those little dotted lines are in the center now. So as I grow this object, and once again, if I hold down the Option key, it's going to be the Alt key on Windows, you'll see that I can actually grow those values from the left and the right, the top and the bottom. And once again, you can adjust these padding values. You can just type it right in. So I could type in a value of 80 there. I can click. I could type in a value of 80 there. I can click. A type of value of 80 there. Let's say the spacing, I no longer want it to be 20. I want to expand that a little bit more. I could type in a value of 40, and then I could type in 80 right there. So visualizing on the canvas is a good way to help you see that relationship between the padding, just so you know that all of this stuff is going to map to code. So when you're working with the developer, you're having the conversation about how this is working, this auto layout is going to match in CSS what is known as flexbox properties. So as you're working through this and as you're defining these values and as you're working with auto layout, you can always check to see how this is going to map in the code using dev mode. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. All right. So here we go. Tab through padding and spacing to edit values. So we just talked about adding and adjusting those values. So you can see here my top padding. When I press the tab key, it'll then go to the right. When I press the tab key, it goes to the bottom. When I tab, it goes to the left. So as I tab through, it's moving through all of the different paddings and then the spacing. So what I can do is I can easily tab through and adjust my values by pressing the tab key. So I could say 48 tab, 48 tab, 48 tab, 48 tab, 48. And then now I've just adjusted all of those values. And what I've done is I've tabbed through each one of those sides. And you'll see that that icon here is going to represent which padding that you're working with. So there's a lot of fun to be had when you're working on Canvas to kind of easily visualize that on the stage. So then this way you have a much better sense of that relationship. So it's going to go top, right, bottom, left, and then spacing when you're adjusting that. So a little bit of a deep cut, but it comes in handy when you're doing that specific type of work. All right, let's head on over to comments. Let's see. So here we go. Someone said, I feel like constraints doesn't always show up in auto layout. Constraints will show up when an object can have constraints. So oftentimes, if I were to create a frame, so this is the answer to Jennifer's question. When I create a frame, I'm going to draw an object in that frame. This object, because it's inside of this frame, let's just call this, constraints test. But because this object is inside of this frame, I can now define its constraints. So right here, it's left and top. So what that means is that object is constrained to the left and the top. So when I resize this, you don't see it move anywhere. When I select that frame and I'm going to choose right and bottom, now that constraint is set to the right and bottom. Constraints are going to play an important role once you begin absolute positioning in auto layout. Oftentimes, when you're working with objects that are inside of an auto layout frame, they themselves will not have constraints because they are following the rules of auto layout. Okay, so there we go. They're available to children of non-auto layout frames, and they are available to absolute position elements, just like Sam just said. All right, cool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is resizing. So when you think about auto layout, there's two types of resizing, right? Either the objects within a container are going to react to the container, or the container is going to react to the objects inside. Right. And so that's the best way to think about it. Are you making something where the contents are going to be responding to their parent, right? So are the children responding to the parent, or is the parent responding to the children? And there's some times where both can happen at the same time, and we're going to cover those today. So here, this is a container responding to the size of the content. And let's just show you how that works. So if I have this text, I'm typing in text. As that text gets wider, the container gets wider, right? I have this text here. As I paste this text in, let's say I change the behavior of this text field. Let's say I select this text field, right? And it has let's say it has a fixed width, for instance. Once I start adding in more text and it's growing, right? As this grows, you'll see that the container is responding to it. So this is one way to think about making an auto layout frame or an auto layout component, is that it grows with the content. And oftentimes you only want it to grow sometimes in one direction, or sometimes you might want to apply a max width or a max height on that. We're going to talk about that in a bit. So what's happening here is that this container is an auto layout frame, and we can identify that by looking over here on the left. We could see that this is in fact an auto layout frame. And this auto layout frame, what it's doing is it's hugging its contents. So here we have horizontal resizing set to hug, and we have vertical resizing set to hug. And when we select that frame, you'll notice that hug and hug values are there. So that means its height and its width are determined based off of the elements inside. If I was to add another element, if I select this rectangle that's inside there, it's serving as a placeholder for an image. If I hit Command D and I duplicate it, you see that its addition then expands the height of that container. If I expand its width, you'll see that that also then expands the width of that container. So the container is responding to the content size. That's one way to think about it. Next, the content responding to the container size. And what that means is here, this content, as I increase and decrease the width and the height, those elements inside of that auto layout frame, what they are set as, I'm going to double click inside. You see I'm selecting this placeholder. The placeholder is selected, and you will see that this being selected, both are set to fill the horizontal resizing and the vertical resizing. So when you're thinking about the objects inside of your auto layout frame and you're determining how they want to behave, you want to think about that resizing. So once again, this text right here, the horizontal resizing is set to fill, and its vertical resizing is set to hug. And the reason the vertical sizing is set to hug is so I can add more text. And you'll see that the remaining elements around it kind of respond to it. So understanding resizing is going to be your key to getting really good at auto layout and really thinking about the behaviors that you're trying to construct. When you're making a component, you need to consider, okay, is this element going to grow the container, or is this element going to respond to the container? And once we start talking about more advanced auto layout elements, such as multiple rows, right? You really need to consider how those elements are going to relate and work with each other. All right, cool. So the way that this works too is that even if you have like a nested auto layout element, right? So this right here is an auto layout card, right? As I add in more text, it grows. But if they are nested inside of another auto layout element, so let's say, once again, like that Instagram feed, right? I can have 3 of these. I'm going to select them all. I'm going to press Shift A. Now they're in another frame. So I'm going to call this feed, right? This is my feed frame. When I extend this, you'll notice that they don't all flow, but I can change their resizing behavior. So I can press return. It's going to select all the children inside. I'll show you that one more time. I'm going to do this a few more times because this is a great shortcut. When I select the feed auto layout frame, there's 3 of those cards that are inside. Let's say I want to select those 3 cards. I'm going to press enter. Now, all 3 of those cards are selected. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm seeing a question in LinkedIn. If you take a look on the screen, there's a link that's going to take you to the community file that you can use. All right. So once again, I have these 3 cards. They're in the feed. Card 1, 2, 3. Right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change their resizing behavior. I'm going to change their horizontal resizing to be fill container. And you'll see that now this container is going to control their sizing. So I'll show you that one more time. Let me hit undo a few times. Let's break this apart. I'm going to destroy that frame. I pressed Command Shift G or Control Shift G. That was a shortcut we covered in the beginning, right? So they're 3 separate objects. They're objects all on their own. I'm going to select them. I'm going to arrange them. Good enough. Select them, press Shift A. Now they are a vertical layout. If I want to make them a horizontal layout, I could just click over here and make them horizontal, but I'm going to leave them as vertical for now. And let's say that this frame here, I'm going to call this feed. Let's give that feed some padding. So let's say, 80 padding on the left and right, 80 padding on the top and bottom. And let's give it a fill just so you can see those elements in that frame. So we've added padding on the top, the right, the bottom, the left, right? And there's spacing between the elements. Now, when I grow this feed, you'll see that they don't grow with it. Let's say I want them to grow with that parent container. I'm going to select that feed frame. I'm going to press enter or return. That's going to select all of them on the inside. Let's say if I want to hop back out, select the main frame, I press shift return, and that selects feed. Now I press return and it selects all of those 3 elements that are inside of it. If you look on the left-hand side over here, you'll see that these are all selected. I press shift return and it selects the parent. I press return and it selects the children. Now that the children are selected, I'm going to come over here to the right and choose fill container. When I set fill container, you see that they are now responding to the parent, right? And that allows them to grow at the same size while their vertical property is still set to hug. So as elements are added, it's going to continue to grow down. Okay, so that's going to continue to grow down. So here I'm going to copy that, I'm going to paste, and you'll see that that grows down. So understanding those resizing behaviors is going to be crucial for when you're constructing your layout. All right, cool. So resizing shortcuts. I see Judy just said that she needed that last shortcut. I'm glad that shortcut was helpful. Let's do another shortcut right here. So resizing shortcuts. You can change the behavior without having to go all the way to the right and choosing that. So right now, you'll see that this item, right, there's some text in here. Let's see, there's some text and there's an arrow and they're inside of this frame. Let's say instead of this frame currently being set to fixed, and what fixed means is as a fixed resizing behavior, you're determining what that value is. So when I look here on this element, you'll see that it's 412 wide. That's a fixed value, right? I'm controlling it versus the hug, which is determined by the text. So if that text gets larger, you see that the parent is hugging it, right? So I want to change this behavior that the horizontal kind of values are also hugging this button. So all I need to do, I'm just going to come over here to the right of that, double click. If you blink, you miss it. I'll show you that one more time. By just dragging this out, I'm setting the width to be fixed. That means I determine the width. Now, if I double click on it, now it's hug. And hug means that it'll grow with the size. So I can change how that's going to behave whenever I feel like it. Let's say this button, I no longer want it to hug the contents. I want some extra space. I can just drag that out, more extra space. Let's say I want that on the left side. I can come over here. You'll see I can align it left. I can align it right. I can align it center. I can even auto align it. So here the arrow goes over to the right and the text stays over to the left. But let's say I want to change that back to hug. I double click and now it's hug again. Always check underneath. You'll see when you have an auto layout frame selected, it will tell you its current resizing behaviors. So you'll see that that is set to hug and hug. So let's say we want to set a fill behavior. We just covered the fill behavior in the last frame, right? I have this parent container. I grow this parent container out, and these are the children elements inside of it, right? And what we did last time, we pressed enter, and then we set them all to fill container, right? And now what we're going to do, we're going to do something different this time. I'm going to just come over here. I'm going to hold down the Option key. If you're on Windows, it's the Alt key. So you'll see I have this object selected. You look underneath it, it says hug by hug. We want instead for that to be fill. So I'm going to hold down the Option key. I'm going to double click and you'll see now it's filling. So I can select this, Option double click, Option double click. So when I've selected each of them and I Option double clicked, they're now set to fill. Let's say I want to make them hug again. Double click, right? Come here, double click, come here, double click. Now they're set to hug. So let's do that one more time. I want them all set to fill. Hold down the Option key, Alt key if you're on Windows. There we go. That expands, and that expands. Now, let's say these elements inside of the auto layout, we want them to have space in between. I'm going to hold down the Shift key. I'm going to select all three of those elements. And here you'll notice that there's spacing. When I hover over it, you'll see it on the canvas get highlighted, right? You see that little fuchsia box in the middle. Instead of saying what we want that spacing to be, instead of manually setting it, what we're going to do is we're going to set it to auto. When you set it to auto, what that does is it creates as much space as there is available within that fill button. So here, now we can create that just as we want it. Now, because those are set to fill, as I grow and shrink the parent container, you see that they will follow suit. So they are now all elements that are filled inside. You can see the parent container is set to fixed. We are determining what that width is, and the children are then filling the container. One last time, if I double click on each of these, they are no longer set to fill container. They're now set to hug. But if I press the Option key and I double click on those edges, they're now fill, and then I can select all three, and we're going to set that to auto. Cool. So someone's asking if we have a one pager that recaps them all. I will share out a link that has a wonderful one pager that has all of the shortcuts. I don't have it available in this file, but I will show you a link to the auto layout playground file on Figma community that actually has a nice listing of every one of these shortcuts that are available. All right, cool. So as of this summer, there have been new features to auto layout. That's the thing you got to recognize, is that auto layout has grown a lot. I remember using Figma at a time before auto layout existed. I don't want to go back to that time. I love auto layout. But Now, there are actually new features in auto layout that have been introduced not that long ago over in summer. So if you're working with folks that have been using auto layout for a first time, have been using auto layout for a while, and you want to show them something that they might not even be aware of, here, I'm going to show you how that works. So let's say here, what I can do, you'll see we're going to apply a min width and a min height, or a max width and a max height. And what that means is in code, you can set an object to have a maximum or a minimum width or height. And what that means is as things grow or as things shrink, you can kind of keep them so they don't, break in the way that you want them to break. So I'll show you a quick example here. I'm going to draw a rectangle. So I'm just going to draw a simple rectangle, right? I'm going to make it red so y'all can see it. Actually, let's make it blue. Let's stay on brand. I'm going to choose that Figma blue. Let's throw a stroke on it. Why not? Let's throw a 6-pixel stroke. There we go. So we have this rectangle. It's on the stage. Now you'll see that I can scale it to any size that I want here, right? Now, if it's applied as a fill in an auto layout frame, it can just grow to whatever that frame is. If I want to constrain it some more, let's constrain it a bit. So here, I'm going to select this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a minimum width on it once I apply an auto layout. So you'll see right here, I'm going to press Shift A. And now that it's inside of an auto layout frame, let's just say, AL frame, this frame can have, when you click over here to the right, I could have a min width and a max width. So a min width or a max width. So here I'm going to apply a minimum width value. So that minimum width, let's say it's 20. And then I can also apply, actually, let's make that minimum width a little bit more, 200. And I can also go in here and add a max width of like 480, right? So what that means is this auto layout frame that I have, let's add some fill to it. Let's give it some padding, right? You'll see that this content inside, it will grow only until it hits a point, and you'll see little red lines show up. It means no more. It's had enough. It will only exist from that point to that point. And where that becomes helpful is if you have components that are auto layout frames. So like, let's say here, let's replace this. Let's just throw in some text. I'm going to say hello, right? And this text goes inside of this auto layout frame. So as I type text, right, it hits like a breaking point. So here, if I change that text field, you'll see that like it won't go beyond that point. So like, let's make some buttons here. So I'm going to call this button. I'm going to press Shift A. Let's add a fill. Let's make it blue. Let's add in 10 padding. There we go. So if I make this button, let's call this button. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply in a min width. So I want my button to be a certain minimum width. I say, okay, 180, right? So now my button has a minimum width of 180. It can go beyond that. It'll expand currently. But if it's just a few words, you'll see that it's going to be fewer. So even in here, I can select that text field. I can make it centered, right? And so then that way, once this, you can see that it's going to grow out there. All right, cool. So min width, max width. I'm going to move on to this other concept here of wrap, as well as a great way to work with min and max. So these elements here, there's a number of them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So currently we've only been dealing with auto layout in one direction or another. I'm going to select all 5 of those elements. I'm going to press Shift A, and you'll see that this third option has been selected, which is wrap. And what wrap does is it allows those elements to fill as much as they go. Hold on one quick second. Thank you. So you'll see that as I type in, right? It's going to grow, and those other elements are going to wrap. So this works horizontally. So if you imagine yourself making like a tag cloud, or if you imagine yourself making a responsive design, right? Let's say you want to make a design that as it grows, it responds accordingly. You can pair concepts like min and max that are going to allow you to do so. So this element right here, what it is this element has a min width, right? And so you'll see that once it hits its min width, it's going to push the other elements down. So if I was to have, let's say, this item here, once again, let's stay on brand, right? And let's take, I'm gonna grab this frame, bring it out here. Here we go. I got another frame here. So I'm going to put these together. So let's press Shift A, right? These elements are together. I'm going to give this like a height. In here, I'm going to set this to min width. Let's say the minimum width has to be 200, and it is currently set to fill container. So now, whoops, let's set this element to fill container. And oh, this one has this too. Let's see. Oh, let's make sure that this is set to wrap. There we go. So now that this is set to wrap, you'll see that with this, it doesn't allow to break beyond that point. If I set that minimum width a little bit uh, 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 smaller, let's say like 100, right? You'll see that when I hit that breaking point of 100, right? We're going all the way down, right? It doesn't want to be any smaller. So it's going to do its best to fill that. So this is a great way to make a responsive card that's going to respond to the width of the content by setting those minimum widths, by using the wrap around behavior. Once again, I can set this minimum width to be a little bit more, let's say 240. There we go. So once it expands, there we go. So it's there. It's going to hit the minimum width, and then it's going to break off into that next line. So minimum width, and as well as the wrap, is going to give you a lot of control. So once again, always test these things out with easy wireframes. Draw in some rectangles, right? I'm going to draw in some, few here, right? And I want to test this layout. I'm going to press Shift A. You see it recognizes the wrap. What happens if this extends? Oh, wow, that's what happens. It's going to grow and it's going to fill, and you'll see it'll hit its max. And once it hits its max, it's going to move on to its own line. And then it might extend beyond. And if it extends beyond, you can always clip that content so you never see it. So you can think of and design ways to test out these objects and how they're going to behave. All right. One other thing that's great here is text truncation. So if you're working with text, let's say I have some text here, I can actually apply a truncate text value, which means that if the text field gets smaller, you will see ellipses. This is going to happen in the event that this field is in an auto layout frame. And you need to consider, how is it going to resize, and how are you going to work with it. There are also options when working with text fields in auto layout frames where you can begin to adjust the truncate text values as well. So I just wanted to highlight that truncate text is going to give you the ability. Let's just take this frame here. You'll see that when it's set to truncate text and you're no longer giving that text space to exist, it will get an ellipsis and show up in a very similar manner as it would if using CSS. All right, so the last concept that we're going to talk about today is absolute positioning. I absolutely love absolute positioning in auto layout in Figma. Absolute positioning is going to give you the ability to have objects inside of the auto layout frame without having them follow the normal flow order. So the way that this is most common is, imagine, let's find our button here. I'm going to have a button. I'm going to show you this outright. So let's say I have a button. So this button here, and then I drop in a circle. So I have an ellipse and I add it into my auto layout frame. So let's say I want to put a notification on here. Once I take this button, I have a million buttons in this file, by the way. Once I paste it in, you see that it's in the auto layout frame. You're like, we don't want it in the auto layout frame. We want it on the top right. So what I can do over here in the top right, there's this absolute position. It looks like these little brackets around a plus. The absolute position is a property that's going to apply to that layer that's going to tell it to behave differently. I'm going to check in the comments too. Let's just see where y'all are at. And it's going to tell it to behave differently. So I'm going to click that and you'll see that now it's kind of free floating, but it's still inside of this frame. So let's take a screenshot of it in the layers panel so you can see what that looks like. So here you can see that the ellipse, this circle that we have inside of this button, is no longer reacting to it. But what you can do is this. So you'll see that we now have constraints available to this object inside of the auto layout frame. We can tell it how we want it to behave when the frame grows or when the frame shrinks. So I'm going to select it. And this is a little bit of a cheat over here. If I align it to the right and I align it to the top, you'll notice that that automatically sets those constraints for me. So if I align it to the left and align it to the bottom, it's also going to set those constraints at the same time. It's a nice little shortcut. So now that it's on the right in the top, I could actually move it to this top right. And because those constraints are set, it's now going to follow the top right of that button. So if I was to take this item and move it down here, let's align it to the bottom, align it to the right. Let's move it down here. It's not only going to follow it to the right, but when I press return, it's going to follow it along the bottom. So if you wanted to have like other elements, let's say this one, this one's going to be our green notification, right? You want to have like a button that has some fun decorations around it, right? And you want this one within the button, right? We add it, we absolute position it, we align it to the right, we align it to the top, we move it over here, we see it's right and top, and you'll see that it will grow and it'll stay on the top while that red one is going to follow the bottom. So that has everything to do with that layer being absolute positioned as well as defining its constraints. The constraints are going to tell it how to react when that frame goes, and it's either going to be right top, right left, bottom right, or even center. So double check that out. There's also left and right constraints. So let's say if I add in this, let's say if I add in this rectangle, I'm going to paste it into the button. I'm going to align it right here, and I'm going to move it to the left and to the right. There we go. So I can actually give it left and right constraints. And what that means is that little bar is going to grow with the thing. Oh, we want to make sure we set it bottom constraints as well. So let's set that to bottom. So that means it's going to stretch along the left and right and then also grow on the bottom. So absolute positioning is going to help this work. So I just seen a question, how does auto layout help developers? Auto layout helps developers because it helps them see the intent behind your design. If I was to take these three elements right here, press Shift A, they're now in an auto layout frame. If I go into dev mode over here, you can see that that layout has then been set to inline flex with align items as flex start and a gap of 29 pixels. So that auto layout is going to be communicated to a web developer as flex box, right? So they can actually see it. So it's helping you as a designer because it's giving you the ability to kind of better test a component and to better test your design. And to a developer, when they go into dev mode, they can then see that intent. They can see this. I can go here, I can mark this for development, I can open this in dev mode, and I can see that those layout values as it was intended by the designer. So it's going to influence the communication between the designer and the developer. Cool. And here we go. As a LinkedIn user, as a developer, I love this. And by the way, as a developer, I'm just going to give this to you here. You see this gap 29 pixels. What you can do is you can hop in here and you could change that to REM units, and you could change your base REM unit, and then that should influence that design. I don't know why it's not updating right now, but it should. Let's go back to pixels. Let's go to REMs. I don't know why the gap's not setting. Let me see. You go to canvas, REM. Normally this works. But yeah, you should be able to see it. I think I just need to set some more values here. Let me see. This might be an old frame. Let's go to dev mode, and I think most elements should be set to my REMs. Either that or I just need to refresh my page. I might need to refresh my page so then that way we'll see it a little bit better. Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on. Once again, absolute positioning. You can have an auto layout element in here that also grows. So you can have like a notification that's going to grow from the top right and into the top left. So you check out these examples that I have here. We're coming up on time. There's a few more examples that I have here. The last one that I wanted to show, this is a really cool one where you can use that auto layout and constraint placement to actually create a shape that can be cut out. And I'll show you that really, really quick. So if I were to create a rectangle, and let's say I want to make a custom button here, let's say I make this rectangle, let's just do 240 by, let's say 120. There we go. So let's say this is the base of a rectangle. And let's say I'm doing some design for like a game UI. I could draw in a circle up here in the top right, over here, right? And I can make these 4 circles. I can select them all. Let's make them green so you can see them. I can basically use them as cuts in a design. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I can select them all and I can subtract that selection. So you see that they have been subtracted. So I can make this a component, right? So this is my little, button, with cuts. And then in here, I can set these as left and top constraints. I could set this as right and top constraint. I could set this as right and bottom constraint. And I could set this as left and bottom constraint. So now that this is set, you'll see that this grows. It's kind of like a fun little ticket. So if I create some text and I create a button, right? And I take this button and I make it inside of an auto layout frame. I press Shift A, right? So we have our button. I can now, let's add some additional padding in here for good measure. So let's say 20, 20, let's say 80, 80. I need some more padding. 80 there. So we got our padding around our button. I can copy this, paste it in here, set it as auto layout. I'm going to set it to the back. I'm going to hit the left bracket key. So that's going to put it all the way to the back. And I can grow this to fill the bounds of this button, right? So it's growing, and I can set left and right and top and bottom constraints. So now this button will grow with that background. So even in here, I can come and I can apply, let's say a stroke value, to this object, and you'll see that this will now grow and expand along with it. If I want to change, that circle, right, I could still kind of change it and grow it, and that button will follow suit. And because it's using that concept of the constraints and the absolute positioning within the button, you can create some really fun, cool UI that behaves a little bit differently. Okay, so that's all that I have for today. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Grace and Design Buddies, for having us join today. If you want to reach out, you can check out figma.com/education for more. I'm on Twitter as Miggi. I'm on Instagram as InstaMiggi. You can also check out my community profile, figma.com/@Miggi. I know someone was asking out there for the shortcuts list. If you go to figma.com/@Figma, figma.com/@Figma, and you look for the auto layout playground file. Here we go. I'm going to share this in the chat. The auto layout playground file has a complete cheat sheet of all of the auto layout shortcuts. So you can even see what are the new ones. So go there, download the auto layout playground file, grab my file, play around. Remember, just start easy, start small, and then build from there. Once again, thank you, Grace.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on. Love your energy, love your vibes. And I'm sure you answered a lot of questions about Buddy from our buddies. And I'm so excited to use absolute positioning on the components I'm building at work as well. Thank you all so much for coming. Today I will be sending out the recording, the Figma community file, and our networking sheet as well, which is actually on our Luma page if you want to connect with each other. So look out for that email if you sign up on Luma. And thanks so much and have a wonderful day.
Have a good one. Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Bye.
Bye-bye.